Lehavin Inyan Neros Chanukah. This is, as you know, the second part of a hemshech, the second part of a series of a Maamar that the Rebbe said in Tafshin Chavav, 1965 to 66, which is based on the Pada B'Sholem Tafresh Ayin Hey from the Rebbe Rashab. In other words, it was 51 years since the Maamar had been said originally as part of the hemshech Tafresh Ayin Beis, hemshech Ayin Beis, B'Shor Shagdimu Terav. You'll notice in the Psach Dover, which is on page Samach Beis, that there was a third Maamar that was a part of the hemshech, which was the Maamar of Miketz, and it appears like the Maamar of Miketz we don't have. We don't even know what the Dibur HaMaschal is. Now we could look. Now a lot of work has been done on trying to track down Maamorim, and I didn't look whether the Maamar of Miketz was found or not. But at least from the Psach Dover, which was written some 25 years ago, and they didn't even have it. But the Rabbi Yossi somehow incorporated, in preparing the Maamar for the Rebbe to edit, of course, into this Maamar Lehavin Inyan Neros Chanukah, some of what would have been in Pashas Miketz, meaning to say there was a hemshech of 3 Maamorim. Now, if I have to give this Maamar a label, the label of this Maamar is Lehavin Inyan Chosid. That's what this Maamar is about. What's a Chosid? The previous Maamar was extraordinarily deep. We gave 5 classes on it, and some of them were very long. And the content, the substance of the classes was the idea that when you bring the highest levels of godliness, it reaches the lowest places. And that the highest level of godliness, which is called Ein Seif HaMelubish B'Rad Lo, isn't even a level of godliness. It's a revelation of Mitziusi Matzmusi, the truth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of the Eibishter himself. And when the truth of the Eibishter is revealed, so it's revealed everywhere. And you can't even call it a cause and effect, like Hashem is revealed and therefore something happens. When Hashem is revealed, automatically whatever it is occurs. So the last time was very involved, right? The high source from which the godliness is brought is called Yeducha Havaya. The low level where the godliness is brought to is called Yevar Chukoi. And the facilitator, the Shatchen, what brings this highest of levels to this lowest of levels is called Chosid. Our Maamar is a further analysis of Chosid, and in this Maamar he juxtaposes, he compares and contrasts a Chosid to a Yoshar and a Tzaddik. I mentioned in the last year that there's 4, but I'm obviously mistaken. It's only 3 levels. There's Tzaddik, Yoshar, and Chosid. And to give you form which is familiar to you from the previous Maamar, Tzaddik is Dei Machseri Ashayachzalai, you give a person what, give him Malchus what is lacking. Yoshar is Ashirus, and Chosid is, as learned in the previous Maamar, higher than Ashirus. And this Maamar is going to spend a lot of time analyzing the differences between Tzaddik, Yoshar, and Chosid. And the argument is that only a Chosid is able to be Mishadech, Yeducha Havaya, which is such a high level of Elokus that you can only have a bittul to it, and Yevar Chukoi, which means to bring it all the way till Malchus, and not Malchus, which is a kli for Yesed, but what Rebbe called in the Maamar, Malchus Sheba Malchus, and the way it's Mislabish and Bian, Ke'erapel Benifal, and a need to tell a key, which is Chashoch, and the Gashmi itself, all the different levels that we learned about in the previous Maamar. Tonight, however, we're not going to be learning about all that stuff. That's going to be in the next class or classes. I don't know yet how long this Maamar is going to take. Tonight we're going to learn the Haschol and the Siyum, the beginning and the end, just like we did in the previous Maamar, Lehavin Inyan. We're going to learn about Chanukah. The only thing that I'm going to say at the outset is that the Rebbe is going to ask the same questions that all Maamorim of Chanukah ask, but he's going to give deeper answers, truer answers, more powerful answers than we're used to, based on the argument that in the story of Chanukah and the Mesiras Nefesh of Chanukah, there was the revelation of what the Rebbe calls in this Maamar Pnimius Atik, or Ein Seif HaMelubish B'Rad Lo. The Rebbe is going to say that in the Chanukah story, which is 20-something, 2,200 years old or so, or more, the level of godliness which is revealed as a result of the Mesiras Nefesh, or the Chashmonaim, was greater than the level of godliness which was revealed in the times of Shlomo HaMelech. And it's similar to the level of a godliness which is going to be revealed, La'asid Lave, when you're going to have not only Ashirus, but higher than Ashirus. And because the Gilui that happened in the Zman of Chanukah is going to be so deep, we're going to understand the number of different aspects about the way Chanukah is experienced and commemorated and so forth. So we're going to have, like I said, a very typical set of questions, and at least at the outset, a very typical set of explanations, but the Rebbe is going to push it. He's going to ask questions which he doesn't typically ask, edela questions, fine questions, nuanced questions. And he's going to resolve them based on the premise that Chanukah is a gili, which is like the Lasad Love. That's what's going to be said in this Maamar. So we're going to start in one moment. I just want to give a very brief introduction about Chanukah, okay? All of us know the chassidus of Chanukah. The chassidus of Chanukah is that we don't celebrate the Milchama, we celebrate the Nes HaNeros. We don't celebrate the war, we celebrate finding the oil. Even though, arguably, the winning of the war was a greater miracle, and it was certainly a more important miracle, because without it we would not have survived. Without the Shemin we would have survived. Nevertheless, the Gemara says, and that's the halacha, not like the Rambam, that we celebrate only the Nes HaNeros and not the Nes of the Milchama, which will be celebrated through Su'udah. By the way, I'm mentioning this Derech Agav. This is 40 years since Tafshin Lamed Ches, and the Fabrengen of Zeis Chanukah Tafshin Lamed Ches, so they sent around the tapes of that Fabrengen, and the Rebbe seemed to be saying almost explicitly that the source of the Rambam, who says that in Chanukah you have Halal and Hidah and Simcha, is a Yerushalmi. That the Yerushalmi says that if a person forgets Valanisim, he has to bench over. And the halacha is that in order to have to bench over because you forgot to mention Yom Tov is only when there's a chiyuv of Seudah. So it seems, and the Rebbe said the Lashon that someone showed him this Yerushalmi, and for him it was like Kemetzah Shalorov, it was like a big chiddush, it gave the Rebbe great joy. Meaning to say that perhaps the Mokar of Shittas HaRambam, which is not like our Shita, that we have on Chanukah two miracles that we celebrate. First of all, the miracle of the Milchama, for which according to the Rambam you have to have Seudah and Simcha. And second of all, the miracle of finding the jug of oil, for which you have to have halal and edah, is based, and the Gemara Bavli doesn't say it. Gemara Bavli just brings the Braise from the Megillus Tainus, which speaks about the Nes HaShemen and not about the Nes of the Milchama, is based on this Yerushalmi. And the Rebbe does, I'm just mentioning the Kutasichas Chelik Yud, Chanukah, the Rebbe brings this whole thing of the Rambam and the Ramah and so on. So we all know the koch of Chassidus that we celebrate Chanukah only the Nes Hashem and not the Nes HaMilchama. And the reason is because Chanukah is considered a Inyan Ruchni. Chanukah is different than Purim. Purim, Haman wanted to kill us. Chanukah fakert, it's the old story, right? In Basi v'choya, the Yevanim did not want to kill us, wanted to keep us alive, but they wanted to keep us alive v'choya in the minhagim of the Yevanim, in the Hellenist ways. And the killing of Jews and the war with the Jews was only because they resisted. So Chanukah is not about Goyim trying to kill Jews, bodies. It's about Goyim trying to kill Yiddish and Neshamas. And of course the story is that there was an act of Mesiras Nefesh on behalf of the Chashmonaim. And if you study the nature of the Mesiras Nefesh, you realize that their Mesiras Nefesh had no place in halacha whatsoever. Because they were living in the hills of Median, and they could have stayed in those hills for many months, maybe even years, until the Syrian Greeks would have reached those hilltops and either forced them to Hellenize or Rahman al-San killed them. They came out of those hills, they came into the valley and engaged in a guerrilla war with the greatest army in the world, with elephants and so on, and the Eibishter made nisim that they won, and they threw the Syrian Greeks out of Eretz Yisrael, and the Rebbe points out, in one of his hiches, that the Lashon HaGemara is v'notzchum, they defeated them, they conquered them. And the Lashon HaRambam is v'ivdum, they made them disappear completely. And then they found the Shemen. So the Gemara says, Lashon Acheres Kavim, the following year was made into a Yom Tov. So one of the ways the story is understood is that when they came to the Sanhedrin, and they said, make it into a Yom Tov, so Sanhedrin sort of said, this is really me speaking as opposed to what I saw in Sfarim, that how could you make a Yom Tov out of an act of suicide? The Chashmonaim were not allowed to go on Mesiras Nefesh. And the Chashmonaim answered, but the Eibishter made a nes. He didn't only make a nes that we won the war, he made a nes that we should find the Shemen. And the finding of the Shemen Toyer was the Gushpanka, was the seal, was the real evidence that the Eibishter supported the Mesiras Nefesh, even though Mesiras Nefesh had no basis in Teira. But the Rebbe says it in the Sichos, it was a Mesiras Nefesh without any cheshbainis. They didn't think about themselves at all. Not even cheshbainis of Kedusha. They didn't even think about Elam Haba and Chayim Nitzchiyim versus Ein Lechel Elam Haba. They were Mesa Nefesh, Lekadesh, Shem Shamayim, and the Eibishter made an es. This is, in short, the way Chassidus understands the story of Chanukah. And of course, that's why we celebrate the Shemen, because we're not celebrating the oil. We're celebrating what the oil represents, the Tahara, the Mesiras Nefesh for Tahara of the Chashmei Noyim. So because it's a Ruchni Yizdika story and a Ruchni Yizdika miracle, we don't focus on the war and winning the war, we focus on the Nes HaShemen. In other words, on the Nes of the Yidden revealing the Yechidah Shebenefesh to engage in a war that B'derech HaTeva. There was no way they could win. L'kadesh Shem Shamayim Barab, to sanctify the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Barab. This is the basic Chanukah story. And of course, what follows is that because Chanukah came from such a deep koyach of Mesiras Nefesh, it has a koyach which is even stronger than the Meneda in the Beis HaMikdash. It brings down a light from higher than Seder Ishtalshalos, which is why it's 8 candles rather than 7 candles. And it can illuminate the night and the darkness and the left side and Klippa, which is why Chanukah Lichter al Pesach Beis Mi Bachutz, outside the house, Mishatishka Cham after the sun sets, and Ad the Kal and Mismail on the left side, Ad the Kal Yirigla, the Talmudoy, until you remove the feet, the lowest level of a tribe of people that are called Meirdim, rebels, troublemakers. So the short of the Chanukah story is a story of extraordinary Mesiras Nefesh, which the Eibishter sanctioned, the Eibishter approved, sent his approval, in the form of the miracle of a jug of oil which should have burned for a day, burning for 8 days. And the koyach of the Chanukah Lich, that it could reach the deepest darkness, and that's why you put it in a place where normally you wouldn't put a mitzvah, in the street and in the night and on the left side, and so forth and so on. This is briefly the Chanukah story. Our Maamar is going to say all of the above, but because this Maamar is based on this idea of Yeducha Havaya and Yevorchu Kei, and of course Chasidecha, the idea that you're revealing in Sefer Melubash B'Adlah, the highest level of godliness, which is really the Eibishter himself. And therefore it reaches the world, not in a way that the world has to stop being a world, but the world as such, the world the way it is, the Yesh HaNivra becomes the Yesh HaAmiti. You see how the world is a lakus, it's the Eibishter. So the fact that the mystical idea is this Yeduch Havai Yevarchu Kei, and the Rebbe is going to argue that on Chanukah there was such a Gilui, higher even than Yemei Shleimim, which of course is a half of a fella, an incredible pella. Therefore the way our understanding of Chanukah is going to unfold is going to be refined and nuanced. So let's go. We're going to learn the beginning. We'll learn the beginning and the end, which is the first 3 pages, and then I guess suppose more or less the last 2 pages, something to that effect. That's what we're going to learn tonight. Be'ezer Hashem Yizbarach v'Yishala. Lehavin Inyan Neros Chanukah. We must understand the idea of the candles of Chanukah. It says the Rebbe Dagam Sheneres Chanukah. We know that the candles of Chanukah Tiknim were enacted to commemorate the miracle that happened with the candles of the Mishkan, of the Beis HaMikdash. The Gemara tells us a rule. When the Chachamim make a takana, and the takana is a reflection of something which is written in the Torah. So the takana is going to be Ke'ein De'eraisa, when the Chacham made a takana which is meant to reflect an idea which is similar to it, min ha-Torah. So the way they make the takana is that it should be close to it, Mikol Makam Harehu Chalukim B'Kam Inyan. The Meneda of Chanukah is meant to be the parallel of the Meneda of the Beis HaMikdash. And there are a number of key differences. Number 1, B'Misparam, the number of candles. The Ba'am Neres B'Mikdash HaYuzayah Neres, Neres Chanukah Him Shmeina. The Meneda in the Beis HaMikdash was 7 lights, and the Chanukah candle is 8 lights. Number 2, B'Mokam Amidasim, they're placed where they're placed, where you put them. And he mentions several points. Number 1, the Meneda Haya B'Fnim. The Meneda in the Beis HaMikdash was inside, indoors, B'Teich HaKedesh, in the sanctuary. Moreover, B'Darim was on the south side, which is Yamin, right? When you're facing east, the south is to the right and the north is to the left. While Meneda is Chanukah, the candle of Chanukah was the opposite. Mitzvah Lanichim B'Chutz, they're placed outside the house, Ubismail on the left side, because they're supposed to be opposite the mezuzah Mimim, then Chanukah Mismail. Of course, this is an idea that you want to be surrounded by mitzvahs, and so on. And finally, Bisman Adlakas. The third thing that separates the Meneda of the Beis HaMikdash from the Meneda of Chanukah is the time that you light them. The Neros HaMikdash Afligu Miplaga Mincha. the candles of the Beis HaMikdash were lit during the day. Plaga Mincha is an hour and a quarter before night. Meshech Zman Shav Rivia Kedim Shtishka Achama, an hour and a quarter before the sun sets. For Ner Chanukah mitzvah, as opposed to the Chanukah candles, its mitzvah is Misha Tishka Achama, you wait for the sun to set. So you have two things that are meant to be the same. The Chanukah Meneda is the commemoration of the Chanukah, of the renewal of the Beis HaMikdash and the Mizbeach and the Meneda. After Timu Kol Hashmanim Shabaheichel, Shenichnasu Yavanim Leheichel, after it was contaminated by the Syrian Greeks, so you make a Meneda against the Meneda. We have these basic differences. And now the Rebbe continues and he says, Umeis Evikveitis is made of Chamei Admur. B'mayim, Be'ebehem, Sheikh Pada B'Sham Tlash, the Fidik Rebbe Adin is Memorim, which are connected to Chanukah from 1943, 44, Tafshin Dalet. Oi, the diuk, another notion, another nuance, bazeh in this fact. Shener Chanukah mitzvah lanich mebechutz, that the Chanukah licht were outside, and the Fidik Rebbe adds the following. The lei motzinu mitzvah. You never find a mitzvah, parenthesis, milvad para aduma, with the exception of the red cow, the red heifer, shetzrich aliyas b'chutz. That's dafka outside. In other words, the Rishus Harab in the public domain, dafka. In other words, there is an assumption that mitzvahs are kaddish, holy, and they need to have a shmira, they need to be guarded, not to become tummy and to become contaminated, and so on. So they have to be done in a Rishus HaYachad, in a private property which belongs to the Eibush, the Yechidi Shaleilam. Rishus Harab is a place of klipa. And faket, that's the whole Inyan of para aduma, you do the chutz l'shalosh machnes, because it can be mavara klipa as well, even tumas, even tumas mes, and even zdaines, like it's brought in the Gersa Kedesh Timin Chav Ches. And the Rebbe observes, the Fidik observes, the only other thing besides the para aduma that has this property is Chanukah licht, and this needs to be explained. And the previous Rebbe explains in that series that the simple reason that the Chanukah is outside is mishum pesum nisa, because you want to publicize the miracle, right? Chanukah has an info pesum nisa. She'asa nisim laviseinu, but yom mehem bezman hazeh is a bracha. You make sai Chanukah and sai Purim. So the question becomes, it's not a satisfactory reason. Why not? Purim also does an Inyan from Sha'asa Nisim. Purim is also an Inyan from Pirsum Manes. But it's Aidei Mishte Shal Simcha, Mishleach, Manos and Matanos Lavyenim, by the feast of Purim, by the giving gifts, by the reading the Megillah, which the Rebbe doesn't mention for some reason. There's no emphasis that you read the Megillah, that you eat the meal, that you give gifts to the poor and to the rich in the street. Only Chanukah Licht. So the question is, what is distinct about Chanukah Licht that makes it like Para Aduma, which is done by Rishus Harabim Dafka in the public domain? So the Rebbe continues in Perek Beis and he says in Ukudas Abir, Bazehu, the point that explains all this. Mavur, Badrush Mas Chassidus explains it. She'enyonim Shaleres Chanukah, the idea of Chanukah candles is that it has the power, Lohoi, to illuminate the darkness. In other words, when you have a light, it's in other words a holiness, which is meant to influence the world. You bring it to the world in a way that it has a positive effect and not a negative effect. So if the light is limited and you're going to bring it into a darkness which is too great, it can have an ill effect. It can be negative. It can be not good. Right? The story with Shmuel Munkis, which I'm not going to tell you about Riches, but the Nekudas Asipa was that there was a machashef, there was a magician that came from Tumah that was performing tricks of klipa, and Shmuel Munkis took a glass of water which he had said his incantations over, and it had become putrid, it had become death. It stunk and it was dark and dirty. A clear glass of water, just by saying words, it turned into putrid death. And Shmuel Munkis made a shakal ne'ebedvari and drank it. It was plain water, but this machashiv, or these machashim just said words, and then the water began to change colors and began to stink, and he said shakal ne'ebedvari, he drank it. Later on, the Alter Rebbe reprimanded him, and he said to him, if not for the fact that I would answer Amen on your bracha, you'd be finished. So, klipa is not real. Klipa is not real. You all know klipa is not real. Yeah, the Baal Shem Tov used to say, I'm afraid of nothing except for the Eibishter. But you have to be qualified to take on a klipa. And if you're not qualified to take on a klipa, instead of you defeating the klipa will defeat you. That's what the Alter Rebbe said. You should not have gone that far. You're not great enough. That's in effect the point. But Chanukah Licht is great enough. It can illuminate the street and the darkness and the night and the left side and so forth. There was a war with the Syrian Greeks to make them forget their Torah. To make them transgress the edicts of the Eibishter's will. And of course, every one of us knows the famous Chassidus Sichas of the Rebbe on this. They didn't mind if you didn't learn Torah, they didn't want to learn Torah Secha, the Torah of the Eibishter. They didn't mind they did mitzvahs, but they didn't want they should be Chukei Ritzenecha. The idea that mitzvahs are higher than reason, first of all, and that the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is L'mayla min HaSeichel, as long as Jews understood that this is only culture, and it's only a way of life that can evolve and change, the Syrian Greeks had no problem. The idea that it came from the Eibishter, that it was sacred, and that Teira Zul, Teira Muchlefes, this is what made them crazy. And the Yidden stood up to them. Particularly since they didn't only attack the Jewish people, they actually went into the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, into the Beis HaMikdash proper, and Kvayachal, the Eibishter left them alone, didn't punish them. And they were metamed, they brought tumah to all of the oil in the Beis HaMikdash. Says that Rebbe Nasis Gabras Acheish, darkness became very strong. I saw in a Maamar of the Rebbe the other day where the Rebbe says that the koyach of tum of the Yavonim is that it can be metame even chochma shebenef shalakis. Usually klipa can fight with the midas of kedusha. Sometimes klipa can fight with seichel of kedusha. Yavon could fight with chochma of kedusha, which is even from bittul as it is in ishtalshalos. And you have to have dafka mesiras nefesh to overcome them. V'lachein, when you consider what Yavon was and you consider the degree of success that they had in being metama kol hashmanim shebehechel, and the Chashmonaim stood up to them. So Kishagov Ramalchus based Chashmonaim, when the house of Chashmonai that were Meluchim, that were kings, stood up against them and defeated them. V'not Chosai Yavonim, and they defeated the Yavonim. And again, I'm mentioning to you what the Rebbe mentioned in the Sikha, that according to the Rambam, the Lashon is Ve'ibdum. They destroyed them completely. Tiknu Neros Chanukah. They enacted the candles of Chanukah, B'chtei Lahoi Rasacheish, just like the Chashmonaim took on darkness itself, which is a severe klipa, and successfully defeated it with their power of Mesiras Nefesh. So the Chanukah candles, which is the minhag, which is the Yom Tov, which is the way we commemorate and celebrate this episode, in the Inyan of Chanukah has the same power to transform darkness as the Mesiras Nefesh of the Chashmonaim was at the time that the story of Chanukah occurred. And therefore, it says the Rebbe Vezehu, and this is the Pshat, and he goes backwards, right? We had 3 points. Right? 8, place, and time. So here he goes backwards. Time, place, and 8. Shazman had lakoso mujitishma chamo. The time that you light Chanukah candles after the sun sets, rather than during the day. Kinyon amshanei is Chanukah ulahoy razachesha, because the Chanukah candles have the ability to illuminate darkness. That's number 3. Now number 2, umakam amidoslim, placed where you put the candles, is bechutz l'shus harabim, outside in the public domain. Moreover, bismail on the left side. Because it has the power to illuminate the street. To read the pruda, that this is a place of division. And klipa, that draws chayas from the side of smell, of the left side. Because klipa comes from smell, or to say differently, klipa kosher comes from smell. From chesed you have the klipa of permissiveness. And from smell you have the klipa of division and cruelty and exactitude. Exactitude, which is judgment that's without a cheshbon. And this is darkness. And the koyach of the Chanukah licht is to overcome this as well. Vezehu, and finally, in addition to the fact that the time is after the sun sets and the place is in the street, the idea that Neros Chanukah came Shmein is that there were 8 candles. The fact that Chanukah has the power, the Chanukah lights have the power to illuminate the darkness, even the darkness of the public place, because the light of Chanukah candles is it's above, which is a light which is higher than Ishtalshalos. And you'll see later that higher than Ishtalshalos is going to ultimately mean the Madrega of Ein Seif HaMalubish B'dat Lo, which is Hemshech is about, which is Mamash Atzmos. Which is why there are 8 candles. The Mispar Shmeina, the number 8, made al bechina shel mal mishtalshos, as an indication, points to a level which is above order. So this is the 3 points which the Rebbe asked in the beginning. What is the reason for the time after the Shkiyah? What is the reason for the place, the street on the left side? And what is the reason for the 8 candles higher than Ishtalshos? But then the Rebbe adds a 4th point, which he didn't really ask in the questions. The days of Chanukah. Besides for the candles of Chanukah, there's the days of Chanukah. The Zeh Shayom Tov Chanukah b'mismah shmeini yemi. Just like Chanukah is 8 candles, Chanukah is 8 days, and no other Yom Tov is 8, right? Sukkot is, Pesach is 7, Sukkot is 8 plus 1, and in certain aspects, is a regel b'fnei atzmei, an 8-day holiday is dafke Chanukah. Shmein yemi de Chanukah tmanya inun, Chanukah is 8 days. V'hu, and the reason for all of these things, to illuminate the darkness in the night on the left side, and after the Shkiyah, and 8 candles, and 8 days, is because the Gilui Shemeh Chanukah, the revelation of the times of Chanukah, is Gilui Shalamayla Me'ishtalshus, so the revelation which is above Ishtalshus. So this is the question, and this is the answer. And the Rebbe continues and he says, V'hinei eir shalamayla me'ishtalshus, the idea that during the Chanukah story, something happened which revealed such a powerful life that can take on darkness and the street and the left side and the night and so on and so forth, is Shemei Yemei Chanukah B'frat B'neiras Chanukah, which is available every year, based on the teaching of the Arizal HaVayam and Ha'elin Eskarim Benas, in the days of Chanukah in general, and in the lighting of the Chanukah candles and the Meneda particularly. How did it all come about? The Gavre, the person who made Chanukah happen, is a group of people who took on the Syrian Greeks and fought them to the point of Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. In other words, the relationship between the light of Chanukah and the darkness that existed at that time, who b'shnei inyanim, is in 2 aspects, milmata l'mayla, from the bottom up, and milmayla l'mata, from the top down. And he explains, milmata l'mayla, what aspect of the Chanukah story and the Mesiras Nefesh of Chas Minayu Bonav is connected to below? It's Shemitzad Gei, the unbelievable darkness that pervaded at that time. Nisated Eslam Kecha Mesiras Nefesh. That's what awakened the power of Mesiras Nefesh. When it's so dark for a Yid that he can't take it, he plots and he goes on Mesiras Nefesh. Shalamayla Mishtachus Shabbat, which is above Mishtachus within a person. And accordingly they brought down the Lakus, which is higher than Ishtachus. So the Mesiras Nefesh of the Chashminoyim, this is the Mumata Lamayla. And then he says, the light which comes from above, that Chanukah Meneda brings a light that's me'idim gamas acheshach, to illuminate the darkness. So the Chashminoyim's contribution is the Mesiras Nefesh, and the Neir Chanukah contribution is the Amshachav Alakus Shalamayla Me'ishtalshus. And I'm just thinking out loud that in a Maamar which I learned someplace else, the Rebbe explains that between Halal and Heidah. The Halal means Behil Neiri Al Reish, means the Eibishter into the world. And Heidah means to submit yourself to the Eibishter Dinyan HaMesiras Nefesh. V'zehu hatam. This combination of the fact that on Chanukah there was an incredibly high light, and that on Chanukah there was a deep Inyan HaMesiras Nefesh, is the reason l'chol achilukim, to all the differences, shebein neides Chanukah v'neides HaMikdash. Separate the candles of the Meneda in Chanukah and the candles of the Meneda of the Beis HaMikdash. Number 1, the light which shines in the Beis HaMikdash, the Mesiras Nefesh, it didn't happen through Mesiras Nefesh. It was limited. It was only Ishtashas, which is Zayin Neides, 7 candles rather than 8 candles. Number 2, since the revelation of Ishtashas ain't bekechel, cannot illuminate the darkness. And if it tries to illuminate the darkness, darkness will defeat it. Darkness is an equal opponent to it. The Meneda, the Beis HaMikdash, must be lit inside. Inside the sanctuary. Moreover, B'yamin, B'darim, on the right side in the south. And number 3, the time light the candles when the day is still young, sun is still shining. A substantial amount of time before the Shkiyah. As opposed to Neiras Chanukah Shalachri HaMesiras Nefesh, there's 2 things. There's the Mesiras Nefesh, which is the Mulmata Lamayla, and there's the Nesod Neiras Chanukah, which is the Mulmayla Lamata. Says the Rebbe, Heim Shmein and Neiras, there are 8 candles, Eir Shalamayla Mishtalshos Shemer Gamas Acheshach, a light which is above Ishtalshos, which illuminates the darkness as well. So we basically, like I said to you in my introduction, this is the classic Chanukah idea. Nothing here so far has been extraordinary. The Rebbe is going to ask questions in Sif Gimel and Sif Gimel, which I haven't heard before, that are going to open up the the depth that this Maamar is going to add to understanding the Chanukah story, based on the idea that during the Chanukah story there was a Gilui of Pnimius Atik. Explains. Why is Chanukah candles put in the street, into a public place? We find no other mitzvah must be in the street besides a paraduma. So why was the takana by Chanukah to put it outside? Because ki in Yonam Shneis Chanukah, since the power of Chanukah candles is lahoira sachesha the Shosarabim canal to illuminate the darkness of klipa of Shosarabim. If you could, then you must. If you can't, then you mustn't. Right? You can't elevate darkness. You shouldn't engage with it. But if you could elevate darkness, you must engage with it. Canal. The aforementioned explanation that Chanukah has two aspects, right? A light that comes from heaven, which is represented by the Chanukah Menorah, and the Mesilas Nefesh of the Chashmonaim, which created the basis for this light. And it's unique to Chanukah because Chanukah is the Yom Tov of Mesilas Nefesh. Says the Rebbe, we have to explain it further. And at this point, the Rebbe begins to ask the questions that are, if you will, unique to this Maamar, or more distinctive to this Maamar. And of course, his answers are going to be especially unique. We all understand that in the light of Chanukah, a light is revealed which is higher than Ishtalshalos. This light has the ability to light up the darkness. We explained in the previous paragraph, was brought forward to the Mesilas Nefesh of the Chashmonaim. I don't understand. Why? Because Mesilas Nefesh the Purim. Also to the Mesilas Nefesh of Purim, the same light was revealed, because Purim was also an Inyan Mesilas Nefesh, like the Midrashim, and of course the classic Maamar of the Rebbe Rayatz, of Kibbutz Yehudim Peizayin, which I believe is based on a Maamar of Atat Tetzaveh, I think, from Ayin Tes, right? We have this whole idea of Purim gathering the children, and Pseikli Psukech, and so on and so forth, also Mesilas Nefesh. Bracket, Ubefrat, moreover, Mesilas Nefesh, the Chanukah Yebi'ike Rak B'Matasyahu Bonov. The Mesilas Nefesh and the Chanukah story was for a handful of people, Matasyahu and his children, right? And without going into all the specifics, remember, half the Jewish people were not B'chlal in Eretz Yisrael. Half the Jewish people lived in Bavel, they didn't know anything about it. They were living in Bavel, B'Shalom, B'Shalva, learning Torah, Mishnah, and so on. And only the Yidden Eretz Yisrael suffered from it. And specifically Matasyahu and his sons, and Purim Haya B'chol Yisrael. So to argue, if Mesilas Nefesh is half the reason that Chanukah brings such a light into the world, which is Al Pesach Beis Mi B'chutz, Balayla Mishatishka Hacham on the left side, at the Kal Yadigel, the time of day, Purim should be even more so. The fact is that late Tiknu B'Purim mitzvah, there's no mitzvah on Purim. Not to light candles, and not to do any mitzvah of the mitzvahs of Purim, that tzrich alis b'shos harabim in the street, rak b'Chanukah, only Chanukah, and the question is why. And of course, basically, we know the Akdoma of the Sharayeda, of the Mittel Rebbe, he talks about the difference between Chanukah and Purim, that one is the Mesilas Nefesh from the bottom up, and the other is the Mesilas Nefesh from the top down. Purim was about lahashmid larig u'layabed. Haman wanted to kill the Jews. It was about a physical thing. And Chanukah was kisva lechem al keren asher she'ein lem el chelik b'lekei Yisrael. It was about denying the Eibishter and the Elokus of Yiddishkeit. But still, in both cases, there was a Mesilas Nefesh, and yet Dafke Chanukah has this property of being Balayla, Barchoiv, and so on and so forth. So now we go to Sif Gimel. And again, the Rebbe is going to ask additional questions. So to speak, the Perek Beis was the classic understanding of Chanukah, and the end of Perek Beis and Perek Gimel are going to be the nuanced questions. We know that in the Beis HaMikdash was also a Menorah and also light, and it's considered Gili of Ishtalshalos, as opposed to Chanukah, which is a Gili which is higher than Ishtalshalos. Observes the Rebbe and he says, that darkness would oppose this light, and it would undermine it, it would encumber it, which is why the Neder and the Beis HaMikdash is inside and during the day, and on the right side, and the number 7, and so on. You move a little madrushim, as we discussed earlier from the Maamar, says the Rebbe, it's only when you contrast it to the light of Chanukah. Aval, why? Because klolus, to be sure, gam ha'er shei bebeis hamikdash, even the light in the Beis Hamikdash, ha yagilu shalamelem ishtalshus, is a light which is higher than ishtalshus. And a light which is higher than ishtalshus, it's true always, that ein cheshich menagid legabei, darkness is not obstructed. So the Rebbe says, before you analyze the significance of the Chanukah candles being so powerful, because they're rooted in this incredibly powerful event of Mesiras Nefesh L'Kiddush Hashem, that it could be Meir, Es HaLayla, Ves HaSmeil, Ves HaCheshech, and so on and so forth, is because it's Ered and Hayes. The Shtalshlus is only relatively speaking. It's only absolutely speaking, but relative, to be sure, the Chanukah, the Bened, and the Beis HaMikdash is also higher than Shtalshlus. And he connects it to Shleim HaMelech. Let's keep going. Close in general, Gam ha'er shei bebeis hamikdash hayagilu shelamayla mishtalshlos, the light in the Beis Hamikdash is also a erev hayden ishtalshlos. And what do we know about hayden ishtalshlos? She'ein cheshech menaged legabei, darkness is not obstructed. And he explains why. Commission is ba'ye le'il b'da pada b'shalom. In the previous maamar which we just finished learning, we learned that zeh shebinyan Beis Hamikdash hayadei shleima. The Beis Hamikdash, where this Meneda was built by Shleim HaMelech. So you have to assume that in the Beis HaMikdash and in the Meneda of the Beis HaMikdash you have the Gili of Shleim HaMelech. Let the Rebbe talk, let the Rebbe read. Av shetavnis HaMikdash nas hayedei David. It's taka true that the design, the plans, the resources, the wealth was put aside by David HaMelech, but the actual construction was done by Shleim HaMelech. Why? Because as the pasuk says, "Hu Shleim Yi Ish Menucha V'Gemer." Shleim is a man of peace, and of course, the way you have to understand Shleim's peace was incredible radiation of charisma and power. Shleim was a man of peace not because he fought wars, but because he had such a presence, and his name, his fame, was so far-reaching that people just humbled themselves next to him. They were subdued by Shleima without a fight, without an objection. They just wanted to be his friend because he had an incredibly powerful good force. As it says in the pasuk, "V'sholem v'sheket etein al Yisrael b'yomav," peace and tranquility, quiet, I'll put over the Jewish people during his times, and it was connected to Shleima's personality. V'lachein hu yivne bayis l'shmi v'geimer. He's the one able to build the Beis Hamikdash. So Shleima HaMelech's personality, B'chlal, like the Rebbe said in the last Maamar, before he built the Beis HaMikdash, and then especially in the Beis HaMikdash, was such that he radiated such a power that the world was appeased. The world was pacified to him and his will and his teachings, which is of course the teachings of the Eibush that attained in Yiddishkeit because of his incredible presence. Moreover, all the goyim were bottled to Shleim HaMelech. Which was the basis for the peace and the quiet, is he was a king that had the power of Shalom. This is based on the pasuk in Shir HaShirim. As you see in footnote 25, he had an incredibly great presence. He was so smart and he was so powerful, and he radiated such power that his presence alone brought peace and subjugation to the whole world. Says the Rebbe, this is Ein Seiv Shalamalam Ishtalshlus. This is godliness which is above Ishtalshlus. And therefore, Lagabi Gili Zeh, relative to this, next to this revelation, Shalamalam Ishtalshlus, which is higher than Ishtalshlus, Mizbatlam Kolam and Agdim, all opponents are bottled. Right? And the Rebbe now repeats, the Gilui Zeh Sheher De Shleima, this revelation of Shleim HaMelech was Gam Lefnei Shabban Beis HaMikdash. It was who he was before he built the Beis HaMikdash as a 12-year-old. Ubebeis HaMikdash Hili Gili Zeh Eidyeis, and the Beis HaMikdash itself, this light was even greater. So you have to assume that the Meneda of the Beis HaMikdash of Shleim HaMelech represented Elokus Shalamayla Mishtalshos. And of course, to use the language of the previous Maamar, it's the Madrega of Ashidus, the Aliyah Shishis, an incredibly great light. Nevertheless, Afal still, Legabe Agili de Chanukah, when you compare the presence and the light and the Gili of Ein Sof of the Meneda Shalamayla Mishtalshos of Shlema, to the presence and the light of the higher than Ishtalshos of the Chanukah Meneda. This is Ishtalshos, and this is higher than Ishtalshos. Gam Gilui Sheheir Bebeis Hamikdash Hu Bechlal Ishtalshos. Relatively speaking, what's shown in the Beis Hamikdash is like Ishtalshos, and only Chanukah is higher than Ishtalshos. Frag the Rebbe v'tzarach bir. I want to understand this. What's achiluk ben Gila the Beis Hamikdash or Gila the Chanukah? If the Gila the Beis Hamikdash is Shlomo Melech, and Shlomo Melech is Ashiras, and Shlomo Melech is Ali Hashishas, and one of the ideas that Rebbe said about Ashiras is you can't give him more wealth. If an usher is the kind of man who's rich but could be richer, then he's not an usher yet. It's an absolute status of Ashiras. Begashmis Beruchnias. And nevertheless, compared to the Chanukah Meneda, it's considered Ishtalshos. And the Rebbe's question is why? So again, it's another nuance on the classic Chanukah theme, but these nuances are setting up the much deeper understanding of Chanukah based on the particular idea of this Maamar, right? The first question was, Purim is also Mesiras Nefesh, so why Dafke Chanukah is in the street? And the second question is, Shlomo Melech, the Beis Hamikdash, the Meneda is also higher than Ishtalshos, so how is Chanukah's lights superior even to that? Now we continue in the next paragraph on page Samachay, and we ask a third nuance, a third detail, question above and beyond the classic questions that are asked about Chanukah. Gam tzarech bir, another question is, we explained before. The time for Chanukah candles lighting is after the sun sets, because they illuminate the darkness. Says the Rabbi, I don't understand. If you have candles that can illuminate the darkness, why do you have to light them at night? The Chanukah candles have the ability to light up the night. We understand that. But it's based on the fact that the candles continue to burn into the night. And by the way, the Meneda candles burn through the night. The Meneda and the Beis Hamikdash burn through the night. Why do you have to light them after dark? I understand that they burn through the night and they burn up the night. But why do you have to light them at night? Why can't you light them during the day and have them burn through the night? Another question. Also based on the classic idea found in the Maamar, where was the Meneda placed? To be outside and to be on the left side. Why? It should radiate or irradiate and illuminate the darkness on the left side and the night and so on and so forth. Says the Rebbe, what's wrong with lighting the Meneda by day inside, but that the light of the Meneda which is lit during the day should continue burning into the night, and the light which is lit inside should reach the outside? In other words, why do you put it in the street? These are little teeny questions that are going to become, the answer is going to reveal the significance of the question, if you will. It says, whereas the light of the Chanukah candles is the light which is above Ishtalshos, even more than the Eid of the Meneda. It's a Eid built in Mugwas, a light without any constraint, any limitations whatsoever. Harei! If you lit those candles inside the Beis Hamikdash, and you allowed them to radiate to the world, they would have the possibility to reach the street. And in footnote 26 he says, like the Meneda of the Beis Hamikdash, that had Chalein Shkufim Atumim, there was Edis Hilachol Boyelim, and so on and so forth. Since the light is infinite, the power of the Chanukah lights will reach the streets as well. Ubefrat, and the question is compounded. And this is a Gevaldike Diuk. Why is it a Gevaldike Diuk? Because the nuanced questions that we have so far are, number one, why do we single out the Mesiras Nefesh? Chanukah there was a Mesiras Nefesh on Purim also. And Faket, then it was for everybody. Number two, Shlomo Melech is also Eir Shel L'mayla Mishtalshos. How was the Chanukah candles even more L'mayla Mishtalshos than the candles of Shlomo Melech? Number three, why do you have to light the candles after dark? Light them during the day and have them burn into the night. And number four, why do you have to light them in the street? Light them inside and have them reach the street. These four questions are are nuances, right? You could do it this way also, yeah? But the last question is really a challenge to the very idea. Why? Because the whole chiddush of Shlomo HaMelech is that he sits in his place and his light reaches the whole world. If Hanukkah candles are even higher than the lights of Shlomo HaMelech, the idea of it taking out into the street is not only not necessary, but it discredits the whole idea. What's the whole word of Shlomo HaMelech? Shlomo HaMelech sits in Yerushalayim and doesn't budge. And Umalkat Shva Shoma Shema Shlomo V'Tova Yerushalayim. The world is drawn to him. He shines such a powerful light that all the klipas come to him from wherever they may be. And then Nitzutze Kedusha and Nizbared, and so on and so forth. So if Hanukkah candles are even higher than the Meneda in the Beis HaMikdash, Kol should have to be inside, because the whole idea is that you don't leave your place and let you reach the whole world. Let's see it inside. Based on the fact that in the previous time we made the following observation. There's a difference between the Mishkan, which is the mobile, the moving house of the Eibishter, and the Beis HaMikdash, which is called Menucha V'Nacha, the final resting place of the Shechina. In the Beis HaMikdash was the clarity which is brought to the world through the light of the Mishkan and the Mened and the Oren, was Kmei Bida B'derech Milchama. It wasn't really Milchama, but it was like Milchama. It was only Milchama in one aspect. In what aspect? Sha'Mishkan Ha'Mahalech B'Mid, but the Oren had to move to bring the light of the Teda to wherever the Bida was. To bring clarity and upliftedness to the sparks that were found there. As opposed to the revelation of the light of Shlomo HaMelech, and especially the light of Shlomo in the Beis HaMikdash of Shlomo, the whole idea is b'derech menucha. It sits in one place. Shlomo haya b'mkeimet. Shlomo is in his place. V'anitzutzes and the sparks, gam anitzutzes sheb'mkeimet arachekim, even sparks very far away, nimshachei love me'atzma, were drawn to them on their own. So for Ket, you could argue that you must put the Hanukkah candles inside, because only then do you see the full revelation of the possibility and potential and power of the Hanukkah candle. And it sits in its place and it reaches the darkness and the street and the night and the left side and the Merdim and so on. It says the Rebbe, move on. If you put the Hanukkah candle outside, you're sort of connoting, you're indicating a limitation. You have to bring it to where the place of Bidin is. That's the Mishkan. That's Milchama. Have it inside, and it'll reach the whole world. Whereas, since the Hanukkah candles, the Hanukkah Meneda is even higher than the Meneda of the Beis HaMikdash, the fact that he illuminates the darkness of the public place, of the public domain. It's not a war where he engages and he descends. It's passive, it's automatic, because of the great presence of this awesome light. The question is incredibly emphasized. The canon is outside. So like I said to you in my introduction, we have a classic Hanukkah Maamar with a bunch of nuances. And the most important nuance of all was the last one we just read. Why is Hanukkah special that it reaches the street? Because of Mesiras Nefesh. There was Mesiras Nefesh and arguably more Mesiras Nefesh by Purim. How is the Eir Shel Amayla Mishtashos of Hanukkah higher than the Eir Shel Amayla Mishtashos of Shlomo and his Beis HaMikdash and the Meneda, which was in his Beis HaMikdash? Why do you have to light them after dark, light them during the day and let them burn into the night? Why do you have to light them in the street, light them in the side and let the light reach the whole world? And the last point is, faked, if they're like and even greater than the Meneda of Shlomo HaMelech, they have to dafka be inside. That's the whole point of Shlomo, that he doesn't move from his place and the world is drawn to him. These are the questions on the answers that explain the uniqueness of Hanukkah. Now we're going to skip the Maamar, which is Siv Dalid and Siv Hey and Siv Vov and Siv Zayin and Siv Ches and Siv Tes and Siv Yud and Siv Yud Aleph, and go straight to Siv Yud Beis. And like I told you, in this Maamar, the Rebbe is not going to repeat what he said in the previous Maamar. He's going to develop it further. Because the last Maamar was so comprehensive, it really was whole. It explained that when you bring down the highest godliness, it reaches the lowest level. And the highest godliness is really God Himself. And because the highest godliness is God Himself, it's not changing the lowest level, it's showing how the lowest level is itself a lakus. And in the language that I used in the last sheet on the previous Maamar that I gave, was that you see how the Yesh HaNiv is the Yesh HaAmiti. And so we're going to talk about that. And so what happens in this Maamar is he talks about, like I told you, Tzaddik, Yosher, and Chosid. And Dafke Chosid has the sufficient bittul, Dafke Chosid has the sufficient this hapcha to bring down the madrega of Yeducha Havaya until Yevarchu Kei. We're going to learn the end of the Maamar now, which is again about Chanukah. And like I told you, the thing you must understand as we do this Haskalah and Siyam and skip the whole Maamar is that Rebbe says that the Gili of Chanukah, which is higher than Shlomo Melech, is comparable to the Gili of the Yosef Lehavin. It's not Dei Machseirei, it's not Ashirus, it's even higher than Ashirus. In other words, it's not Tzaddik, it's not Yosher, it's Chassid. And it reveals not Mechin Stimoin, not Galgalta, and not even Radlo. The Ein Sof HaMelubash B'Radlo, which is basically the Eibishter himself. Says the Rebbe in Perik Yud Beis V'al Derech Zeh, everything we said in the Maamar, which we are yet to learn, about the idea that a chosid is Magala, the Madrega of Ein Sof HaMelubash B'Radlo, because of his incredible bittul and so on and so forth, and it's going to be Liyasid Love, it happened in Chanukah. Or Befrat, Gilei Neres Chanukah, particularly the candles of Chanukah. Shetiknu mipnei hanes shaya b'shemen is enacted because of the miracle that happened with the oil. Says the Rebbe who gili pnimiyas atik. It's the same revelation of L'asad Lavi, like it says in all the Maamorim, based on Kabbalah. That L'asad Lavi is going to be pnimiyas atik rather than chitzenius atik. V'zeh shemavur ba'adrushim, the fact that we said in the Maamorim. Shamayla the Neres Chanukah, what's special about Chanukah candles? The Gabi Neres HaMikdash, when compared and contrasted to the candles of the Mishkan, of the Beis HaMikdash. Hushagilu the Neres Chanukah hu l'mayla me'ishtalshalos, that Chanukah lights are above ishtalshalos, says the Rebbe, you have to specify. After klolos ha-kesed, even though in general, all of kesed, gam arich, u'bekolshin chitzenius atik, is l'mayla me'ishtalshalos. But the l'mayla me'ishtalshalos of arich, which is tzaddik, and the Lamayla Meishtalshlus of Chitzenius HaKeseh of Atik, which is Yosher, is not the highest. Yesh Leimar, 4 lines from the bottom of page Ayin Beis. Ke'in de Lamayla Meishtalshlus, who the idea of Lamayla Meishtalshlus ultimately is Shehu B'chol Mokim Lamayla Lamata B'Shav. If something is truly beyond any form, there is no distinction whatsoever between one place and another, one level and another, one world and another. So even though Arech is L'mayla Meishtalshlus and Chitzenius Atik is also L'mayla Meishtalshlus, but there's constraints, there's limitations, there's different aspects of inefficiency or inexactitude associated with them because of their limitations. The true idea of L'mayla Meishtalshlus, which is absolutely B'chol Mokum B'Shava, Inyan Zeu B'Iker B'Pnimiyas Atik. This idea is primarily in Pnimiyas Atik, in other words, Ein Sof HaMelubash B'Radlo, which is the Eibishter himself. And when the Eibush himself is revealed, remember the Lashon from the previous Maamar, yeah? We learned it in the last Shir, yeah, that we just gave you. What's the Lashon? I'm looking at the bottom of page Nun Gimel. Pnimius Ati calls us Atzma Sein Tov. The Lagame Atzma Sein Teif Ein Shum Metzias Shechutz Mimenu Va'adraba Mitas Himatzi Yisborach Hu HaMetzias Shel Kol Adam Tzayim. This was revealed on Chanukah. Eibishter himself through the Mesiras Nefesh. And again, the Mesiras Nefesh is Mamata Lamayla, and then the Eid is Mamata Lamata. Says the Rebbe Shagil, the Chitzenius Atik, the level of Chitzenius Atik, which is also Lamayla Mishtalshus, but who be Ike Lamayla is revealed in the higher worlds. More. Ela Shenim Chokopel Gam Lamata. It has an effect below as well. But canals, if we discussed earlier, Inyan Agilish Heira de Shleim HaMelech is also as a Shiras, yeah? Shleim HaMelech is Yosher. Shleim HaMelech is Gilach Chitzenius Atik. Says the Rebbe, Iker Agila Hoye B'Yerushalayim. Shleim HaMelech sat in Yerushalayim, and his light reached the whole world, but there was a difference between his presence in Yerushalayim and in other places. Top of page, Ayin Gimel now. El Shenim Chokobog, Upol Gam Bishva. In other words, Shlomo HaMelech's light reached the whole world, but there was a difference between close and far. When you talk about something being above ishtalshelus completely, that the farthest place and the closest place are identical in relationship, but this aid is b'pnimius atik, is in the level of atik, which is called pnimius, which means ein seif malubish b'rad law. Shuanam tzagimtza atzma gimtza gam lamata. The Eibush is everywhere the same. V'yeseidim is that moreover shalagabi yagil the pnimius atik. When you're talking about ein seif malubish b'rad law, lo yesh ne'achilik d'maylamata. There's no distinctions. Because when there's a revelation of pnimius atik, now the Rebbe says the same lashon that he said in the previous Maamar, nigish b'chol dover. Look at the words. Hametzias shalei gufi alakus. It's not a bittul. The Eibush, when the Eibush himself is revealed, doesn't break you, doesn't change you. You see how you're him. So mitzad echad, you're not changing at all. Mitzad hasheni, it's a totally new metzias. And this new metzias is b'chol mokim, b'chol dover, b'chol madrege, b'shav. So now, the basic idea of Hanukkah we learned, right? We have the nuances to address. How the Mesiras Nefesh of Hanukkah is different than Mesiras Nefesh of Purim. Why you don't just have it burn during the night, you light it during the night. Why you don't have it lit inside and it should reach the street, you light it in the street. All of these questions must be answered based on this idea that the Gili of Hanukkah is higher than the Beis HaMikdash, higher than Shlomo HaMelech. It's similar to the Gili of the Yosef Lehavin, which is Peladig, Mamish, Meidendig. Says the Rebbe Perikud Gimel V'zehu, and now we understand Chanin, Hanukkah Mitzvah Lanich, Al Pesach Beis Mi B'chutz. The Hanukkah candles are put outside the house, L'Rishus, that happened to the street. Loi Keneras HaMikdash Haya B'fnim. It wasn't like the candles of the Beis HaMikdash which were inside. They shine to the outside. Now remember, the argument is that Shleim sits in Yerushalayim and his light reaches the whole world. In other words, Shleim's light is inside the Beis HaMikdash and it radiates to the whole world, and that's the pshat Shalom v'Shalva, Shalom v'Sheket. He sits in his place, but it has to be lit inside. The idea that the light of Chanukah irradiates, illuminates the darkness, and the street is be'efin is in such a way it's not that the light is inside and it reaches the street, but the light is in the street itself. In other words, Shleim Etake sat in his place and his light reached the whole world, but the power of Shleim to reach the whole world was based on the fact that he was found in his place. In other words, it's not the pshat that Shleima's light was so powerful that wherever it was, it reached the whole world. It's because it was in a Makam Kaddish, its foundation gave it the power to radiate outward. The Hanukkah Meneda doesn't know such distinctions. You light it in the street itself. And then he continues, V'zeu Gam. This also explains Shezman Ad L'Kosam Mishtishmacham. You dafka light it after the sun goes down. And he explains, the fact that Hanukkah candles illuminates the darkness of night, it's not in such a way that light is ostensibly a day thing. It shines at night as well, which would be the Inyan of Shlomo HaMelech. But rather that there's no day and there's no night. The darkness itself shines. So the Neret in the base is lit during the day because the day has to do with light, but it shines into the night. The Neret in the base reaches the whole world, but it's burnt inside, lit inside. So the Hanukkah candles, there's no difference between inside and outside. And the only way to emphasize there is no difference is by putting it into the night and putting it into the street. So the Chiddush is that when you say by Shlomo HaMelech, there's whole idea that he was sitting in one place, isn't that it doesn't matter where he was sitting. He had to sit in a special place and in a special time, and then there would be the power of his aid. The Hanukkah Menera reaches everywhere without a special time, without a special place, in the street and in the night, and as the Rebbe says, the light of the darkness of the night itself begins to shine. Moreover, the fact that the light of the Hanukkah candles is gam b'mokim b'zman ha'cheshech, in the place and time of darkness, reshus harabim v'layla, public, the minute of the night, and the Rebbe uses the classic words, ha'cheshech atzma nepel, the darkness itself becomes light. Not, hafichas cheshech atzimtzum legilui, that in the place where there used to be light and the light was removed, you bring the light back. But the phenomenon of darkness itself, which as Chassidus explains it as Abriya B'fnei Atzmei, Cheshech Atzmei Yoir, the Gashmi itself, the Klipa itself, the Nitrutz Atzmei Nasa Choshoch, and then the Klipa of the Nitrutz Atzmei Choshoch itself becomes godliness, Lichtigkeit. So really what the Rebbe did in answering the question was not add something to our understanding of Chanukah Licht, but qualify our understanding of the Menorah in the Beis HaMikdash of Shleima. That it reaches very far, but only if it sits in a particular place. Chanukah Licht is lit in the street and at night and in the darkness and after the Shkia, because it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make any difference. And the only way to emphasize that it doesn't make a difference is to do it at night in the street, in the left side, and so on and so forth. This also explains. So how many of the 5 nuanced questions did we answer? Basically all of them, right? We had, what's the difference between the Mesiras Nefesh of Chanukah and the Mesiras Nefesh of Purim? This we did not answer. We had, what's the difference between the L'mayla Mishtashos of Chanukah and the L'mayla Mishtashos of Shleima? This we did answer. The Shleima Melech's L'mayla Mishtashos has to start from a particular base. Daytime, indoors, Beis HaMikdash. And the Chanukah candle doesn't have any of those constraints. And we also answered about the fact that you light it after the Shkia and that you put it in the street. And you put it in the street, even though l'cha'ere, if it's an Inyan of Shalom v'Sheket, you're better off putting it inside, because it makes no difference whatsoever. So really, all that's left is this one question: why is the Mesiras Nefesh of Chanukah different than, higher than, the Mesiras Nefesh of Purim? So the Rebbe says, this also explains the last, or the first of these nuanced questions. On the fact, it's the Mesiras Nefesh of Matasyahu and his children, the Mesiras Nefesh of Chanukah, and Leah, the Mesiras Nefesh, the Purim. Purim is Gvaldik. Purim is also Pesum Enisa. Purim is also Mesiras Nefesh. And Vaket, it's Ada Layada, with the whole Shturm of Ada Layada, yeah. But it's not in the street. Farvos. Kya Mesiras Nefesh, the Matasyahu, one of the names of the Mesiras Nefesh of the Chashmonaim Hoiso. Shagam, Shayach Alosh, and Mumiatim, they were weak and they were few. Mikom Makam Lacham Uneged, Giberim Verab, they fought against strong and many. They engaged in a war with the Syrian Greeks using Teva. What was the Teva? They went to fight. But Hagam shall be Teva in Mokum. There's no way in nature that weak and few should be able to defeat the strong and the many. Says the Rebbe, is because Hoya Munach Etzlam. Because there's something very profound about it. It wasn't that they went to fight. It wasn't that they went to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. They went to win. Which is a big chiddush in what was going on in the minds of the Chashmonaim. Look, Haya Munach Etzlam abgelegt. The Chashmonaim, because of their inner Mesiras Nefesh, had this clear sense Shegam HaTeva, nature itself, bracket, Elamazeh HaTachtein is the lowest world, Shaklipa is Gevin, which dominated by Klipa, Va'afilu Kisha'elam U'B'matzev Kazeh, and in this Elam HaTacht, which is dominated by Klipas, the Klipa is Menagdim, which are Gebedim V'Rabim, stronger than them and more than them. But Teva itself is a Lakus. So here the Rebbe says something unbelievable. You know, we always talk about the Mesiras Nefesh of the Chashmonaim, how reckless it was. That they made no cheshbeinis. Says the Rebbe, understand the Chashmonaim's recklessness was based on an inner Mesiras Nefesh. This inner Mesiras Nefesh put them in such a mindset where all they saw was God. Tev is Alakus. No, if Tev is Alakus, how could Alakus be defeated by Klipa? This sentiment that the Chashmonaim experienced, not that they were going to fight a war of Kiddush Hashem, of suicide, but that they were going to win. Because Tevez Alakus is mitzad hergish, because they, the Chashmonaim, felt amitis imatzi yisbarach, atzmos, the Eibishter himself, the Einseif HaMelubish B'Rat Lo, and that Hu HaMetzi is the Chol HaMetzayim, he's the truth of everything, including them and the Yevonim and the whole thing. That's how they made it happen. So you have over here a Chiddush Gadol B'Yisr. It's not that the Chashmonaim went on a Madrega Mesiras Nefesh, which is not based on Halacha, but the world that they saw through their eyes was only Eibishter. And when you're so elevated, the world that you see is only Eibishter, you see that you're going to win, and there's no such thing as odds. There's no such thing as probabilities and likelihoods. It's the Eibishter's world. And this didn't happen for him. And therefore, Taka by Purim, there was a Gewaldike Mesiras Nefesh, and it involved children with ganzen Shturim. But it wasn't because they saw that Tevez Elikus. Chanukah was this Madreg. And that's the answer to the final question, or the first of the last set of questions, that even though Purim was Mesiras Nefesh, and it involved more people, it's Dafka the Chanukah Mesiras Nefesh, which has the koyach to illuminate the night and the darkness and the left side and so on and so forth, because their Mesiras Nefesh was based on an incredibly elevated perception. They were raised up so high because of their preparedness to sacrifice for Elikus, that they saw how Tevez Elikus and that they were going to win. And this didn't happen Purim. And the Rebbe now finishes the Maamar. So all the questions are answered. V'zehu, this is the pshat. Shezman Chanukah is by night and so on and so forth. But ad de kalya rigla de tarmadai, until there's a kiloyin, a total erasure or transformation of the feet. That means the lowest level of this nation called Tarmadai. Tarmadai was merchants. They stayed out late. But it says in Kabbalah, it's written in footnote 78, he brings from the Emek HaMelech and the Kehilas Yankiv, that it's Asias Meiredes. Tarmadai heim hamedim b'malchus shamayim. Tarmadai means those who rebel against Elikus. Tarmad Asias Meiredes. Vayidei ner Chanukah, and the Chanukah candles, nasa kalya regel the Tarmadai. You make a kiloyin even in the lowest madreg of this nation called Tarmad. Says the Rebbe, the Shnei Pirushim, but there's two aspects. Number one, she'er the ner Chanukah mechalo mevateles regel the Tarmadai, destroys the feet of this klipa. But number two, v'she'er the ner Chanukah pe'el kiloyin, the light of Chanukah affects the kiloyin, not in the sense of being destroyed, but faked, being included in Elikus, like Aleisa Nefesh, Kaldi Meloshin Kilyam Aleisa Nefesh, Gamba Rigel Tamadai, the lowest klipa also becomes godliness. Why? Because if you Megala Helamatzmi, if you Megala, what's the Loshin? Amitis Himotzei Hametzias Techal and Imtsoyim. So nothing is outside of that, not even Meiredes. Shegam Eile, shall you Meirdim? Even those who are rebels, reach a stage of Kaleis HaNefesh. This is what's advantageous about Birush Haidei Giludin in Chanukah, the clarity which the Chanukah candles brings. Compared to the clarity, which is the fact that Shlomo Melech's light, which is Ashidus and Aliyah Shishis and all the rest, shall be made. Shleimei, the time that Shlomo Melech Taken is Badaru, you brought all kinds of sparks, but sparks that have some kind of sensitivity to a torch. When you shine a big light, the small light is drawn in, but not darkness. And not the sparks which were blackened. And certainly the sparks in evil opponents of Elikus were certainly not elevated. And I want to add something more that the Rebbe said in the previous Maamar, that not only does Chanukah elevate the sparks that nechshechu, but the gashmi itself, in other words, the casing of the spark which is blackened, is also elevated, not by being destroyed, but that you see that it's Elikus. The yesh haniv is the yesh hamiti, vayidei agila, the ner Chanukah, the candles of Chanukah, nasa kiloyin, kaleis hanefesh, gam birgit hamadoy. And the Rebbe concludes, and then it's true about Chassidus, that Chassidus is also the Ein Seif HaMelubash Berad Lo. So the Osad Lavi is Ein Seif HaMelubash Berad Lo, Pnimius Hatik. It was revealed in the Chanukah story, which is higher than the Menorah and Shlomo Melech and so on and so forth. And it's also true of Chassidus. Shagam Eila, that even people Shebematzev Shel Chutza HaChayora, that the lowest level of Chutza. Keil Gami in the Medida Rachman Lasan, they're rebellious. Says the Hele Kereb Daidei Afotza Samayon is Chutza, bringing the fountain itself to the outside in a way of Afotza. Mizbatelas Kol Metzias, somebody that destroys, it's Mevatel completely, any form, any idea, any trace of rebellion or rebelliousness. Shahoy, as some lifneis which I had before, even the lowest level of Merida, which is the feet. It affects the Kiloin Kalesa Nefesh. Which is the same thing as Mashiach, which is going to be an infinite Hapcha. Hashem says He's going to remove all uncleanness from the world, to the extent, like it says in the pasuk, that it's not going to be an Inyan of destruction, it's going to be an Inyan of transformation. So tonight we did the beginning of the Maamar, the end of the Maamar, and the next class or two, I don't know how many it'll be, we'll learn the Teicha of the Maamar, the Biur, And the nekuda of the maamar itself can be summarized in one word. What's the meaning of the word chassid?